Welcome everybody. Prayer Spaces in Schools session number 5. If you don't already know, the purpose of these sessions is to help us all run better prayer spaces in schools. And thankfully, they're starting to gather momentum again after a long period of lockdown and difficulties and having to be really creative about how we run prayer spaces. We're now a little bit freer to do that, which is really exciting. We got an email from someone down in Dartford earlier last week who said they're planning prayer spaces with 6 schools, and that's just music to my ears right now. All very exciting. So these sessions are always a mixture of kind of delivered training content, interviews, and discussion time as well, because we really want to learn from one another. If you haven't already picked this up, prayer spaces in schools is and always will be work in progress. It's the product of our experiences and our learning from and with one another. So when you come to these sessions, please come kind of ready to give as much as to receive. So the format for tonight is we're going to do some interviews with 9 lovely people, including the truly wonderful Ruben Gauci, who is in Malta right now. We're going to interview Ruben, which is lovely. I'm so pleased he's here with us. Relieved, in fact, that he's just arrived. And then after those interviews, we're going to do some breakout rooms. Now, I'm really aware that some of you, perhaps like me, you kind of lean more introvert than extrovert. And so the thought of breakout rooms doesn't fill you with joy. Please go with it for tonight. The experience of previous sessions is that the breakout rooms, the sort of 8 to 10 minutes that we'll spend there, are actually really useful time learning from one another. So I'm pre-warning you that in about 35 minutes, 40 minutes, we're going to split off into breakout rooms of 3 or 4 people and get a chance to sort of learn from one another's top tips, as well as from those that we're going to be hearing from. So previously, we've done sessions on creating great prayer activities, on well-being, on outdoor prayer spaces. In the future, next session, we're looking at recruiting and training great teams. How do we function as great teams in prayer spaces? And we're also talking about doing sessions around curriculum and the theology of prayer spaces as well. Tonight is all about top tips. Tonight is going to be full of gold. So I would recommend getting yourself a notepad if you haven't already got one, because you're going to hear, let me work this out, at least 27 top tips from 9 people tonight on how to run the best prayer spaces. And I guarantee there'll be some real gold in there. So before we dive in, I'd love to pray, and then I'm going to hand over to Tim, I think, who is going to conduct our first little batch of interviews. I was reading in 1 Peter 4 earlier this morning, and Peter writes, "The end of all things is near," which is quite ominous. But then he goes on to say, "Therefore, be clear-minded and self-controlled so that you can pray." I don't know about you, but I find the world quite confusing. Sifting through all the fake news and the distracting stuff isn't always that easy. And so I find Peter's instruction, his urging, timely. Be clear-minded, be self-controlled so that you can pray. If ever there's a time that we need to pray, not only for ourselves, but for the children and young people that we're working with, to intercede for them, to exercise the authority that God has given us in Christ, it's now in prayer. And I think it's no surprise that we read in the Gospels that it was only prayer. That was the only thing that the disciples asked Jesus to teach them. And so let's just pray briefly together, shall we? Jesus, we are aware that there's all sorts of change and turmoil and challenge in the world right now. There are all sorts of pressures, particularly on the children and young people that we are working with. And so we ask you to help us to be really clear-minded, to discern, to be strategic in the things that we are doing as teachers and youth workers and children's workers, as parents, as priests, Whatever our roles are, help us to be clear-minded and self-controlled so that we can pray with authority, and see your will done and your kingdom come in the work that we're doing. We offer it all to you tonight in the name of Jesus. Amen. Without further ado, can I hand over to the ever and always wonderful Tim Abbott?
Hello. Yes. Well, it's my privilege to interview 3 people. So I'm going to be chatting to Catherine Clayton, to Scott Riddle, and to Liz Ogborn. But first up, Catherine. Now, I think we have a way of, yes, there we go. Catherine, hello.
Hi.
Hi. Okay, like everybody else, if you just like to, just give us a moment, we'll catch up, because I haven't seen you for ages. But Catherine, for at least, well, over a year. Catherine seems to have a series of careers, but one of them, she was an amazing part of the Prayer Spaces in Schools team, and has been, and also had a career leading umpteen prayer spaces in Oxfordshire. So, Catherine, tell us a bit about what you're up to now, and about your Prayer Spaces in Schools life that you had.
Okay, very, very quickly, because I'm aware I have very little time, because Phil has given us a warning.
Yeah.
So I now work for an organisation called Kids Matter, where we have a vision to see every child in need raised in a strong family. So we equip churches to run parenting programmes for disadvantaged families. My prayer spaces career, so I spent 10 years in Oxfordshire developing prayer spaces across that county, and still look back on it with lots of fond memories.
How many prayer spaces?
Oh gosh, you know what, Joanne, you can ask me that, and I can't. Oh, I have several, a few, I don't know. I think now there must be about 500 that have happened across Oxfordshire. You probably know the stats better than I do now, but something like that.
You are the queen of stats.
I was 2 years ago.
Yeah. So from all those prayer spaces, but also from your experience of having built up, I mean, a fantastic network of people delivering prayer spaces across Oxfordshire, what's one of the stories that really stands out for you?
So I was thinking about this earlier, and it's quite a simple story, but it's very powerful. It must be about 4 or 5 years ago. It's in a secondary school in Didcot, which is a town just south of Oxford. And it was a group of year 7 pupils, and it was first thing in the morning. And I'd just gone to visit the local kind of churches running the prayer space in the town there. And I just remember walking in, there's one girl sitting kind of just by herself, right at the edge, not getting involved at all. And all the other students were all milling around, doing the different activities. And one of the volunteers came up to me and said, "Oh, do you think that girl's okay? Should we go over and talk to her and see if she needs any support or help?" And I just said to the volunteer, I said, "Actually, no, just leave her, because we have no idea what her morning might have been like. No idea what her family situation was. And so just let her be. And, I'm sure in a little while she'll get involved." And sure enough, 10 minutes or so later, she started walking around the space and very cautiously, but began to engage with the different activities. And I think for me and for the church team there, that was quite powerful, because it was actually, and I think even in the last year, everything that's been going on, young people need that space to be able to process in lots of different ways, but they need to do it in their own time. It's not about forcing them or rushing them. It's giving them space to be able to do that, and a safe space, which is what prayer spaces do. So that's my standout memory.
Yeah, fantastic. So what are your 3 top tips that you want to bring to us this evening?
So yes, number 1, there's no need to spend lots of money. So if you're worried about spending money, needing lots of fancy equipment, you really don't. I remember the first prayer space that I ran, we just borrowed stuff from different churches, people's homes. And then I remember probably about 7 or 8 years later, we had all this fancy equipment in Oxfordshire, but still the pupils would walk into the space, and their sense of awe and wonder that they received as they walked into the space, all the fancy equipment, was exactly the same as with the blankets and throws and cushions that we'd kind of gathered together from churches across the town. So you do not need a massive budget. That would be tip number 1. Tip number 2 would be, don't be afraid to change an activity halfway through the week if it's not working, because sometimes you might suddenly realize on Wednesday, actually, I'm not really engaging, the kids aren't really engaging in this activity. Change it. Don't be afraid to do that. Talk to the school as well, find out what the school kind of are getting feedback from the students, and maybe need to make a few tweaks, and that's totally fine. And lastly, build a team of ecumenical volunteers, so volunteers from different churches across the town or city or villages that you're working in, and look after them. I remember there was one church team that did this so well. There was chocolate biscuits and tea and coffee and cake, and they knew exactly where to go in the school for anything that they needed. And there was always this lovely kind of snacks in the classroom where the prayer space was happening. So just make them feel kind of like that they know where everything is, look after them, help them to build relationships with one another, because when they do that, then you build a strong team to be able to serve other schools across that town as well.
Fabulous. Well, thank you. That's how you end up running 500 prayer spaces across Oxfordshire, isn't it? It's biscuits and tea and lots of love and care.
Yes, that was it. Yeah, bribery.
Catherine, thank you. Scott, hi. Great to see you. You're just down the, not too far from where I'm in Colchester. But Proximity Schools Stamford, tell us just a weeny bit about who you are and what that is.
Yeah, so I'm part of Proximity Schools, which is the schools work part of Proximity Church, formerly 24/7 Prayer Stamford, so part of the 24/7 Prayer family. And we've been doing schools work for at least a decade, maybe 12 years roughly. And it all started with prayer spaces. That was kind of the first thing, and it's grown into lots and lots of different things over the years. Probably not time to mention them all, but yeah, loads of different projects have kind of come and gone and are still going here.
And from 10 or 12 years of schools work and prayer spaces, what's your favorite memory? What's your
probably one that stands out is so we had quite a few young people from our church in one of the secondary schools we were working in, and we were really praying for it. And as part of one of the we ran a after school cafe. We had student volunteers, and these young people in the church were helping with that, and a couple of their friends were being involved with that as well. And as they kind of grew up helping with the cafe and got into sixth form, these young people came and helped with a prayer space week in the school. So they kind of came and served their school, as the church, and one of their friends that helped was kind of on the journey of faith, and came and helped and served their school and helped people engage with God as she was herself engaging with God, and she later came on to be a Christian and be baptized, that we heard when she went to university. So just so great to see faith spring up through these prayer spaces.
Fantastic. Yeah. And so what would you say your top 3 tips from Stamford?
I'll claim them as mine as opposed to Stamford ones.
Yeah, go for it.
My first one would be simply prayer spaces start in prayer. That was certainly our story here. Some of you might know Carla. She devoted time to pray for a prayer space to happen in the local schools, and just in thinking about this, we've had prayer spaces in all 3 secondary schools in our town since then, in different ways, but it all started in her committing to prayer, and things happened, and she met people and got invited places, and they happened, and all that story started with prayer.
Right. Yeah.
My second tip is service. Really cultivate a heart of service. I think something that I can often fall into, kind of 10 years down the line, is that we ought to be here, and we feel we do have a place in the school, certainly with the relationships we have, but I think it's always good to come back to that sense of service, that sense of we're here to be a blessing to the school. Sometimes they might ask us to do things that we might not feel capable of or want to do, but we certainly want to meet them with the things that they need, and offer what we have in terms of people and resources and time to support students and bless them in the ways that we can. And then thirdly and lastly, simplicity. Yeah, whether you're using prayer spaces from the website or creating your own, it's often the simple ideas that are the best, the ones that just really grab your attention. You can explain it in, you know, one sentence. Yeah, it's they're the things that really stick and can be really profound, I think, for young people.
Thank you, Scott. That's great and good to see you. And Liz. Hello, Liz. Hello, Liz. So, hello. Tell us just what's your best, one of your best stories. What's the story that you just love telling from Prayer
Love
Spaces?
telling it, but
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of sad in a way, but it's also, you know, a really powerful moment, which is that I was once helping to host a prayer space around identity in one of Bristol's, in fact, the country's top independent schools for girls, and it was year 7 only, and in one of the kind of, it was the bubble tube that elicited the emotion, but in one of the bubble tube spaces, we had them just talking about their anxieties, writing their worries and prayers on the, and sticking them on the bubble tube, and you know, in that kind of atmosphere, you can probably imagine the sorts of things those girls were feeling worried and anxious about, all kinds of things around body identity and body image and pressure for schoolwork and all those kinds of things, exams, being away from home, many of them. And the head of year 7 just popped into the space while the girls were in there one session, and just wandered around and had a look, and went into this tent with the bubble tube and read some of the prayers, and actually left in tears because she just had not appreciated all that was going on for those girls and in their lives. And it was a powerful moment for her, but it you know, it led to some really important conversations in that school about the pastoral care of those girls. So yeah, it was a sad moment, but it was a powerful moment and a kind of revelatory moment, really. And it just you know, prayer spaces are powerful. They can be really powerful. They can expose all kinds of things. And yeah, so I guess it's about following that up and having the conversations that need to be had after something like that happens.
Yeah, no, that's really helpful. Yeah. And so your top 3 tips for tonight?
Yeah, really briefly.
Yeah.
So my top tip number 1 is involve yourself in the conversation about how the prayer space gets communicated to the parents. Because I've had a couple of interesting scenarios where a teacher or a head teacher, or maybe someone who wasn't in the room when I had the conversation about what prayer space was, has written a little note in the school bulletin, and it says something that sounds really quite scary. You know, like there's a group from the church coming in to lead prayer for a week or something, you know, and they haven't really understood what it is and what it isn't. And so I'd say involve yourself in that conversation about how that gets communicated. Tip number 2 would be ensure that your team and any school staff who are going to come in with the children to the space understand that it's a space for quietness and stillness as much as is possible with children, and that the aim is kind of to have minimal interaction really between adults and children. And you know, some people need to hear those words more than others, because you know, if you're a member of the school staff, you're just used to being there talking to the children all day, trying to elicit responses from them, you know, trying to encourage them onto the next thing, and it's quite hard sometimes, particularly for school staff, to just step back and let it happen. So I'd say be clear in your communication about that, and with your team as well. And then my 3rd tip is to collect evidence for the school from the prayer space. So to collect some of the prayers that children have written, any other, you know, displays that kind of tell about what's been going on, give evidence about what's been going on, maybe through questionnaires given to the children or to the staff, but collate all those and some photos into a report for the school, so that you can make recommendations perhaps, and they can, you know, for some key observations as to what's happened in the space, ready to inform your next one.
Brilliant. Well, thank you. Yeah, I love the one about involve yourself in the conversation. I can see how that could go so wrong or so right. But yes, getting the wording right. That's great. Right, Liz, now at this point, I'll hand back to you and you take it from here. So thank you very much, everybody.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. Just a quick mention now I'm going to be doing the next little batch of interviews, but just a quick mention about transition activities, year 6 transition activities. It's that time of year. I mean, it's not a normal year, is it, by any means? And so it may be that you're not particularly thinking about or able to go into school in the next few weeks to do some of the things that perhaps you normally do in terms of helping year 6 children transition to secondary school. But if you are, then it's just a reminder that there are a number of things on the website which might be able to help you. So in the resources section, if you go to prayer activities, you can then show filter here. By the way, brand new website, woohoo, isn't it amazing? Go to the resources section, show filter, and then here you can see all the different kind of themes of all the different prayer activities that are there. So if you wanted to run a prayer space for particularly to help year 6 children in their move up to secondary school, you might pick some prayer activities from the change and transition section, or from the journey section, or from the looking ahead, looking forward section, or perhaps from the worry fear section. So just to give a little example, if we click on change transition, there's a number of prayer activities which are really focused on helping year 6's transition to secondary school. So that's one thing you could do. We've also produced we produced last year in proper, if you remember, visitors weren't going into schools last summer, but we produced a kind of transition prayer activity thing suitable for then, which could easily be used now or adapted if you've got slightly more freedom with resources and things. You might remember children just literally were sat at their desks and couldn't really move off their desk or share resources last year, so it's written for that. And Laura's going to share I think a link to that in the chat, so feel free to use that if that's helpful. And then finally, in terms of helping children transition from primary to secondary school, back in our resources section here, you might have spotted in this drop-down memory, there's something here called Leave a Service. And this leads me on to the very wonderful Jane Whittington, who I'm going to interview in a moment, because Jane has helped us or developed for prayer spaces in schools this fantastic resource, which is around a leaver service for year 6. So it's in the format of a service, but it includes, you can download it for free there. It includes some fantastic prayer activities, which again are designed to help children in year 6 move on. So do have a look in the resources section of the website. Take a look at some of those brilliant resources that you could use. And so now I am going, I think, to interview the wonderful Jane Whittington initially, but then also Catherine Simpson and Ruben. But first of all, Jane, just while we're on the theme of transition, could you just, well, first of all, just tell us a bit about who you are, but then I think you've got a story and some top tips for us, which are particularly related to the idea of transition.
So I'm Jane Whittington, and I currently work for the Diocese of Guildford, where I'm one of the schools team. And prior to that, I was involved in schools in Surrey, where I think I ran one of the very first prayer spaces in my school in Farnham many years ago. I'm resisting the temptation to make that my moment of memory. And instead, I just want to tell you about the year 6 prayer spaces / leaver services that we've been doing at the cathedral for the last 5 years. We have about 500 to 600 year 6s at a time. They come up spread over 6 services, and they engage in a variety of prayer space activities for the first about an hour, and then we pull them all together in a service. And my memorable moment is the first year I did this. I still can't believe I was allowed to take over the cathedral and do this, but I was. Standing in the middle of the aisle of Guildford Cathedral, looking round at 500 year 6s actually engaging in those interactive prayer spaces. It was just amazing. It was all I dreamed of, prayed very hard about, and nobody else had really knew what I was talking about. It was just wonderful. So just moving on, Liz, this year, obviously we can't have that number in the cathedral. So I've put together a sort of pick a mix pack, which I'll put the links in the chat and everything, that you can use in your local church or in your school with, and actually this year I've made it for year 2s and year 6s. So there's a variety of prayer space activities, and then there are 3 or 4 suggestions how you pull them together into a service. And actually what we've realized for this year is we need to put some COVID stuff in. So the regret activity will be looking at COVID as well as other things. And we're also going to put in some stuff for parents, because actually parents find their children moving from primary school really difficult. I'll hold my hands up, I haven't written it yet, but I know what's going to be in there, but it's not on the website.
Okay, fantastic. We'll really look forward
So
to that.
please help yourself. It's there for everybody to use.
Thanks so much, Jane. Thanks for sharing all of your amazing experience of hosting those incredible Leaver services in the Diocese of Guildford with us all. It's fantastic. So can you just give us your top tips for particularly around transition spaces? And
yeah, so top tips for transition prayer spaces, particularly if you're thinking about something really big. First of all, involve everyone in your planning and your setup. I think this goes for every prayer space. Talk to the caretaker, talk to the office staff, ideally talk to the cleaners, get everybody involved and make sure that everyone knows what's going on. It was the midday supervisors who were my greatest supporters in the first one. Top tip number 2, if you're running a really big prayer space for leavers and you've got a carousel of activities, set up more prayer stations than you technically ought to need for that number of pupils, particularly of the things that take longest. So if you're doing the WOW transition flags, they take the longest. So I always have 2 or 3 extra WOW transition flags. And finally, with the Leaver services, do encourage the school staff to actually engage with the activities. Some of the staff have been really moved by thinking about their moments of regret or their wow moments for the year. And I think this year, with COVID, celebrating the good of lockdown, mourning the losses, it will be really important for staff to engage as well.
Yeah, fantastic. So practical and helpful. Thank you so much for that, Jane. Brilliant. Thank you. And turning now to Catherine, who is our fantastic networker in the Durham area, working for the Durham Diocese team, a growing faith champion. Here we go. I'm introducing you for you, Catherine, but is there anything else you want to say about yourself?
I think you've covered it all, Liz. That is me. That is me.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. Would you like to share a little story, a memorable moment?
Yeah, I mean, prior to my working for the Diocese of Durham, I was a primary school chaplain for 7 years. And when Phil emailed me and said one story, I was like, one, I can't just pick one. The kids just absolutely loved doing prayer spaces. And the first one we did was, it was probably a bit ropey and things, but the kids were just so enthusiastic. And for some reason, I don't know why I do this, but I always like to kind of challenge myself. So the kids that I used to get to help me, let's just say perhaps they weren't the kids that you would choose normally. And I think one of my sort of favourite stories is watching, let's change her name to protect the innocent. This little girl in year 6 who was a complete nightmare. She was a horrible child, I have to say, a real bully, and just, and I thought, let's get her involved in leading prayer space. And you know what? It was absolutely transformational. It was just amazing to see her kind of just take the responsibility on and take it so seriously and get involved. And we found that she had a real talent for working with the younger kids and explaining things, and she literally just came into her own, and you could see her sort of physically kind of, you know, just rise to the occasion. So that was fun.
Wow, that's amazing. That's so cool. Okay, and do you have some top tips for us, Catherine?
So my top tips: less is more. I think I learned over the time, because I made the mistake of getting the kids involved from the word go, and like, right, which stations are we doing? And they had like about 50 favourite stations by the time I left after 7 years, and they wanted to do them all. Less is more. I used to try and pack too much in, and every time I used to be like, it used to feel a bit of a rush. So learn from my mistakes, I would say. You know, if you think you can fit 7 in over a day, you can probably only fit 6 in, or possibly 5. Just to give the kids time to engage with each station properly, and you're not rushing it, which kind of leads on to my second tip, which is just pray all the time. Like, start with prayer with the kids. I had each class come in turn, and we used to gather everyone together and pray at the beginning. Then they used to go off to the stations, then I used to pull them back at the end, and we used to pray at the end. And it was just kind of that normalizing prayer, really, just surrounding the whole thing in prayer, that it wasn't just, this is what you're doing at the stations and then you're back to class. It was just that whole kind of embracing it in prayer completely. And the third one is give as much of it away as you can to the children. I mean, I was in a primary school, and I saw kids leading, you know, kids as young as year 3, leading stations and explaining to their peers. So just get out of the way, really. They did a far better job than me. I'm under no illusions. So just don't underestimate the young people and the children that you're working with, and let them have a go. Also, on the evidence side, let them take the photos, let them go around and gather the evidence. And I did scrapbooks. So the primary schools love floor books and scrapbooks. So I did a scrapbook after each prayer station, which had prayers from the kids and some of the activities that you could keep. And also any volunteers that I'd had in from churches, they wrote little testimonies to put in the back. So that's all good for Siams.
Amazing. Well done, Catherine. Wow, you're so great at drawing people into what you're doing and therefore empowering them. And that's just really inspiring. Thank you so much for sharing. Ruben in Malta, hello. Well, I felt like I was on the Eurovision Song Contest for a moment there. You're Ruben in Malta. Can we have your scores, please? But no, I'm not going to ask you for scores. Ruben, it's so lovely to see you and speak to you. Ruben, just tell us a bit about who you are and what you do in Malta.
So I'm Ruben, and I coordinate the pastoral care in state schools in Malta together with a team, including also Silvan, who is also here. So yes, and one of our main aspects is prayer spaces in schools. So yes, it's been like a wonderful experience through these last years.
And do you know how many prayer spaces have happened in Malta, Ruben? I'm putting you on the spot
maybe
there.
it's a bit difficult to calculate all of them, because but yes, I think there have been hundreds of them, sort of in schools and also beyond, in parishes and beyond the institutions, sort of, so in groups.
Yeah, fantastic, amazing. Ruben and his team are awesome. So, Ruben, do you want to just share a memorable moment with us from one of the prayer spaces?
Okay, so maybe it's more of a process that happened in a primary state school in Malta. So we were invited to promote and do prayer spaces, to organize them in the school, and after the meetings with the head and all the preparations, we set the prayer spaces. And before the students made the experience, we took also the opportunity to train the educators and to make so that they can make the experience themselves. After they did the experience, we processed what happened in them, and the emotions and what was going through, and it was a moment where many existential questions popped up through these educators. So it was an opportunity for educators to delve deeper into their personal lives and continue to grow in their relationship within themselves, with God, and with others. So they were also equipped to accompany their students and also to reply to questions that the parents had, and also they did. In fact, also there were a small number of parents who asked to help in setting up this classroom dedicated to prayer spaces. So it was like a wonderful experience, which included all of the school in this process.
It was all leaking out to the whole community, which is just amazing. Yeah, fantastic. Okay, Ruben, have you got some top tips for us if we're going to host prayer spaces?
Yes. So there are certain prayer spaces that can instill like very strong emotional reactions in. And especially when related to very strong experiences like loss, failure, and therefore wherever prayer spaces are held, like I think that there should be people who are capable of holding and supporting the children where they are, and also the adults where they are. So as organizers, one can speak also to the professionals part of the psychosocial team or the well-being team, who can be also available for those who wants to speak with them. Together with this, it's like many times there are like prayer spaces are organized in groups, but sometimes there could be instances where maybe it's better to lead the children and students one by one, especially where there could be like maybe a greater possibility of behavior problems, or they might not get together.
So just to give them that personal space to use the space on their own, and you've done that, haven't you? In Malta, we've seen photographs of students engaging on their own individually, which is fantastic. Okay, tip number 2.
Yes, sure. Yes, I think love must be the leading principle in the whole of the process. The process of prayer spaces in the preparatory stage, in the preparation of resources, of the maybe repetitive things to prepare the templates and all the stuff, in welcoming the students, and also in the prayer spaces themselves.
Yeah. So asking God to motivate us just with His love. Yeah, fantastic. In all those things. Brilliant. Okay, tip number 3.
3, yes. I think there are no limits for space where prayer spaces can be organized. The only limit sort of sometimes is only in our minds. One needs to keep all options open where to hold a prayer space. Many times space is a very common limitation that schools find. But the suggestion is to start small, and when the people see the beauty and benefits of prayer spaces, more physical space and also more time is made for this experience.
I like that. The only limits are in our minds. That's so great. Yeah, fantastic. Thank you so much. Thank you to Ruben and to Catherine and to Jane. And I think I'm handing back to
me. To me, yes, to me. You're only, 7 minutes over time, Liz. Never mind. Right, I need Jonathan Keir, Susie Dand, and Tim Abbott in the room. Who's going to arrive first? Jonathan. Jonathan, brilliant. While the others find their way in, Jonathan, quick introductions. Who are you? And tell us a story.
Yeah, so Jonathan Keir. I I work, I love the Forest of Dean in Gloucestershire. And bizarrely, God brought me back to the Forest of Dean, having travelled around the UK from Newcastle, London and Wales and Bath. So here I am. Fell in love with prayer spaces, and I've been absolutely blessed to be able to be running them. And one of the kind of things that springs to mind about something amazing that happened, I do a prayer space on health and well-being. And at the end of it, an hour-long prayer space that we're able to have, we have a couple of minutes of just pure silence in a circle, some candles in the middle, no music or anything going on. And one of the teachers, just as we were approaching this time, I think it's all the idea is 1 minute per age of the child. So I think these are about 8-year-olds. A lot of stuff I do is primary schools. So 8 minutes of pure silence, and the teacher was panicking because this one pupil, she was convinced was not going to make 10 seconds.
Yes.
And I think this is the kind of setup of the difference that prayer spaces make to pupils. As it happened, I just so happened to sit next to him in the space. I joined the circle as well. And he made 1.5 minutes of that 8 minutes, which is wonderful and amazing. And actually just next to him, I was able just to quietly chat to him, and just, he was unbelievably respectful of the others that need in the space. And so that was just an amazing story, how the teacher was just totally blown away by a difference that a prayer space can make, by, you know, bad labels, but, you know, problem children. So that's my kind of memorable memory.
I've been in lots of prayer spaces where a teacher's brought a class in and said, look, I'm only going to bring them in for a couple of minutes because this lot are a nightmare, and I'll take them out because they've just wrecked the place. And then half an hour later, the teachers came, what's going on? I don't understand this. Hey, Jonathan, give us your 3 top tips.
Yeah, okay. So in no particular order, one of the things I like to do is to try and create as much mood. It's stuff that's kind of already been said before. I go as cheap as I possibly can. That's my nature, not to spend any money at all. But something I kind of use to create that kind of mood is I use loads of bunting. I put loads of bunting up around the room. Now, obviously, be careful with the bunting, because if you're doing one on grief, maybe bunting's not the right thing to be using, but you know what I'm saying with all that. Soft lighting, pinch as many bedside lamps as you possibly can around the house and other people's houses. Ask permission before you go in. And the other thing I use as well, I actually got this this trance music track. That not the kids expect trance music to be happening, but just nice and soft level of this trance music really kind of just helps set the mood. It helps them, if they want to chat, they don't feel that everybody is listening to their conversation. So that's tip number 1, is create the mood. Number 2, which is kind of linked really, is be a charity shop regular, and get to know everybody in your charity shops, and tell them what you're doing, and so actually they can start looking out for things. I mean, just I've got some material, some African material. I don't know what I'm going to use it for yet, but I just have to buy it, because you never know. So charity shops, great places to go. And then actually in the prayer spaces themselves, around the stations, as we've mentioned before, to have as little interaction as possible, let the children go round, is try and keep your instructions, especially stuff that I do in primary schools, if you're dealing with 4, 5, 6-year-olds, actually keep the instructions as simple as possible. Try not to use as many big words as you can. So my top 3 tips.
Jonathan, thank you so much. Love those. And thank you so much for being with us. I'm going to move over to Susie in her recording studio in London. Over to you, Susie. I think we can hear you. Yes. Over to you.
Hello, Durham. Hi, I'm Susie, and I'm a chaplain at a secondary school in West London, and I'm also a curate in the Diocese of London. I have to say, I haven't actually got my collar in. I decided to take that out. So probably my moment that I remember, there's lots, but I think the one at the moment is I'm in the middle of running a prayer space with our new Year 7s, and one student in particular, and one issue we have, is around anger. And I was basically brought a Year 7 who had had a meltdown, and I was like, well, what am I going to do with this Year 7? And so I just went, okay, we're going to go to the outdoor classroom and we're going to trial one of these prayer space activities we're going to do next week. And so he sat down on a bench and he had to listen. And I set a timer for 5 minutes, and he listened, and he had to think about where all the sounds were coming from. And so there was the shouting from one of the classrooms that, of course, was well ventilated with its window open. But then there was all the bird song. and the sound of a lawnmower on the park, and it really calmed him down. And then when we actually did the activity as part of his RE lesson, he said to me, he was just like, I just remembered doing that activity with you and thinking about where the sound was coming from. And it just really struck me how you can kind of just use an activity in a completely different context.
Yeah, brilliant. That's great. Susie, I know you'll have loads, but can you just give us 3 top tips?
3, have laminated instruction sheets, and have lots of them, because they'll disappear, or a student will decide to chuck them in the paddling pool, or they'll step on them and you won't be able to read them anymore. Make them cleanable. My second one is have a written, personalized lesson plan that is specific to the context that you've shared with the teaching staff you're working with beforehand, so they know exactly what you're doing at what point. If you're moving around spaces, have those timings and spaces on your lesson plan, because they will be really good at giving you the feedback on the specific students and classes. And my third top tip is walk the space in between your sessions. You will be able to pick up maybe where there's been a safeguarding concern on a post-it. You'll also be able to see where some students may have got a little bit silly. So last week I had loads that said, shush, Boris Johnson. Those all got a little bit removed quite quickly. So yeah, those are my 3 top tips.
Very helpful. I think one of the tips that Tim's had around that checking post-it notes is if you get your team to each have a felt tip pen and go round after each class and just dot every post-it note or bit of torn up cardboard, read that, I'll remove that I need to talk to the teacher about. It's a way of tracking what's happened in a particular lesson. So great top tips. Finally, the legend that is Tim Abbott, who along with Jane ran one of the very first prayer spaces way back in the dawn of time. Tim Abbott, who are you, where are you, and give us your best story.
Hello, I'm Tim from Colchester. I've been doing schools work for probably nearly as long as Wayne Dixon. The legend, the double legend that is Wayne Dixon, that we all know and love. Hi, Wayne. Yeah, we've been doing prayer spaces for a long time, but not for the last 2 years. We might have 4 at least after half term if the current things are going. So, but in a kind of new form. Favorite story, I'm still go back to a girl I'll call Anna, who was a year 9 girl who I spotted talking really excitedly to her teacher in a prayer space about what she had just experienced. And we went across and sort of like, well, you know, what's been going on? And in the feedback form, she wrote, 3 days ago, I'd have described myself as an atheist. Then something happened yesterday that changed that, and today has just confirmed it. And I don't know what she'd experienced, but the prayer space had been the place that had confirmed to her that in some form there's a God that was real. She didn't put it as deliberately as that, but you could tell there was something very real, very profound spiritual that happened to her that had changed her view of the way the world and the universe works completely. And she was just talking about, if you've ever seen somebody who's just become a Christian and they're trying to explain it to somebody, it's always a brilliant moment because they don't have the words, don't have the vocab for it, because this is just an experience that is bigger than anything, any framework they've ever had. It was that kind of moment. I'm not saying that she became a Christian in that moment, but it was that kind of spiritual revelation moment that she couldn't explain it because she didn't have all the words for it, but she had to try and explain something. It's always, I think for me, that's what I want to, that's what I believe these places can do, and that's what I still live for whenever I run them.
Amazing. Tim, give 3 top tips.
3 top tips. I'm gonna first one is a top tip, picking up on Jonathan, talked about sight and sound. I also want to say smell. So we've discreetly put 3, like usually in a fairly big space, discreetly put 3 domestic passive air fresheners around the room. And it's very interesting how people react differently to the room. School rooms have a particular smell to them. But if you change that smell, you change people's perception about what's going on in there. Anyway, that was bonus tip, which I threw in because Jonathan mentioned it so brilliantly. I thought I'm going to pick up on that and add to that because I hadn't thought about it until you mentioned it. So credit to Jonathan for that one. We set up in secondary schools, we set up on the Friday after school before the following week. So we used to set up on the Monday morning, but that was a nightmare. Setting up on the Friday after school means, firstly, you've got a bit more time and it's quite quiet and you don't have the pressure of having to get it ready for the first lesson. Secondly, it means if you've forgotten anything, you've got the weekend sorted out. That's always a bonus. Second activity, yes, we need to let young people, children, have their space to engage with it their way at their speed and to make their own meaning of it. But we always now have in secondary school prayer spaces an activity that revolves around a conversation. So some of you will have done the character card suitcase thing. We've been doing that nearly ever since we started doing prayer spaces. But having a couple of young people in a conversation about character is just so encouraging and uplifting. They go away, their socks blessed off by it because they've had somebody sit next to them say amazing things about them. But they also have engaged with an adult that's listened and cared. And so just one or two of those can be incredibly valuable. Final thing, hook magnets.
Yes.
Hook magnets are, okay, we are big on hook. We've got about 40 of them now. If you've got a school with a suspended ceiling, those little strips that hold the roof tiles are steel and magnets will stick to them. And we've got hook magnets, which you could hang 5 kilos off them quite safely. They will take up to 10 kilos. So on a safety factor of 2, that you can hang 5 kilos, but they're great for just, if you want to string lights around or you want to hang strings from something and you don't need to you don't have to put a thing in there for the strings to hang from. They can hang straight from the ceiling. It means if you're using a classroom that's got a fairly low ceiling, you don't have to, it's good economical use of space. But the ability to hang decoration and decor and Jonathan's bunting and all of that sort of stuff. Yeah, hook magnets are brilliant. They're a bit expensive. Buy the neodymium ones. They're the more expensive ones, but my goodness, they stick. So which is safe.
Stunning. I just love that we've had Scott right at the start talking about prayer and service and earnest things like that, which are incredibly valuable. And we've ended on this blindingly important top tip: hook magnets.
Hook magnets. You'll all be looking them up now. I know. If you're not using them already, you will. Yeah, Jane is. Yeah.
Not a single person has mentioned bubble tube.
Yeah.
It's I'm shocked. I'm shocked. Anyway,
we don't use bubble tube.
Time has absolutely run away with us now. We've got 6 minutes to go. What I'd love though is for us to just dip in to breakout rooms just for 4 minutes to say hello to one another. We're not going to do 10 minutes breakout rooms. Is that all right? 4 minutes. Introduce yourself to one another. And if there's an absolute blinder of a top tip that you really need to tell someone, do that in the breakout rooms. And then when we gather together, it's just a couple of little bits of news. We're not going to have time for feedback, but a couple of little bits of news. Perhaps you can type in your top tip into the chat when you get back. But Laura, is that all right? If you can put us into groups of 4, if possible, and then we're going to have 4 minutes. It's going to be so quick, but quick. Hello to each other, and then a top tip. Can we do that? Please, everybody, join your group now. Welcome back, everyone. I'm determined to finish on time. We promised that we would finish at 8:30, so sorry we overran with the interviews, but I hope that was valuable for you. Here they all come flooding back. Lots of smiles, which is a good sign. All you've had time to do is just say, hello, my name is, it's time to go again now, isn't it?
Yes.
But hey, it's been lovely.
Magnet link is in the chat.
Well done, Tim. If you didn't spot it, we're gonna gather together all the links from the chat and we will put them out in a follow-up email. Laura will email you all in a few days' time. What she's going to do is edit the video, put a little logo at the start and the end, and remove the breakout bit because we don't need to broadcast that into YouTube. And so that will go live on YouTube in about 3 days. And then once we've got that link, we'll put that out in a follow-up email with all the links as well. But I just want to say a massive thank you to you for joining in, to all of our interviewees who've done a sterling job of answering great questions in 2 or 3 minutes. And what a wealth of tips. If you haven't already done so, Liz has mentioned the Prayer Spaces in Schools website has had a 4-month refit, and it's just gone live about a week ago. If you haven't already checked it out, please have a look. Those of you who were members of the previous iteration of the Prayer Spaces in Schools website, sorry, but you have to create a new login on the new one. Part of the reason for that is we couldn't just import the database of details, GDPR and all of that. So you've got to sign in again, but it's worth it. It doesn't cost anything. You get loads of free stuff. So I'd really encourage you to have a thorough look around the new website. There's a few glitches. If you spot any, please email Laura about that, but we're trying to fix them all at the moment. And Laura's kindly put her email address in there. So send her a nice email. She's new at the job. She'll be really grateful. Final thing to say is the next Prayer Spaces session is on the 28th of June. And the theme is going to be teams. How do you recruit great teams? What are the kind of people that you want on your team? Here's a top tip from me. Make sure there's grandparents on your team. I love having older people on my teams because they have that hospitable thing going on with kids. But we're going to talk a lot about teams and how to recruit great teams at the next session. And then we've got some other ideas as well. If you have any particular suggestions for themes that we could base one of these sessions around, please let us know. But otherwise, I think that's it. Tim, Liz, Laura, is there anything else we need to say?
No, I don't think so.
In that case, can I ask everyone to unmute themselves for a moment? And what we're going to do, those of you who've been here before will know, rather than have this long drawn out goodbye, people gradually dribbling out, we'll all say a big goodbye to one another at the same time, a wave at each other, and then Laura is just going to close the room and we'll all just kicked out in one go. It just saves that awkwardness of dribbling out. So is that okay? So everyone unmute, and on the count of 3, we're all going to say goodbye to one another and have a good rest of the evening. Ready? 3, 2, 1. Bye.